When missiles start flying, information becomes a weapon of its own. Within hours of the latest Iranian strike on Tel Aviv, two completely different narratives were circulating simultaneously on social media. One said the city was destroyed, unrecognizable, buildings flattened across entire districts. The other said nothing significant had happened at all, that the strikes were intercepted, that life was continuing normally, that the situation was under control. Both narratives spread at the speed of a retweet. Both were shared by millions of people who had no way to verify what they were seeing. And both were wrong. Not partially wrong, not wrong in minor details. Wrong in the way that information gets wrong when it moves faster than verification can follow it. The truth about what is actually happening on the ground in Tel Aviv after the Shahab-3 missile strikes is more complicated than either narrative, less dramatic than the worst claims, and more serious than the most optimistic ones. Understanding it requires looking at what the evidence actually shows rather than what the most viral clips are designed to make you feel. What I intend to give you here is not a headline and not a clip. It is the pattern, what the Shahab-3 actually is and what it was designed to do. What Iran's strike strategy has actually been using in terms of weapon combinations and why. How Israel's layered defense system actually works and what its real limitations are, rather than the mythologized version that circulates in both directions. What the ground-level impact in Tel Aviv actually looks like based on available evidence, and how to separate information that is verified from information that is being amplified because it produces engagement rather than because it is accurate. To understand the Shahab-3 and why it matters in the context of this conflict, you need to understand what it was designed for and why Iran has been using it alongside a range of other systems rather than exclusively. The Shahab-3 is Iran's most historically significant ballistic missile program. It was developed with a range and payload capacity specifically matched to targets at Israel's distance from Iranian launch sites, which is why it became the centerpiece of international non-proliferation concern about Iran's missile program for 2 decades before this conflict began. The Shahab-3 carries a warhead in the range of 750 to 1,000 kilograms depending on the variant. Its circular error probable, the measure of accuracy that describes the radius within which half of all fired rounds are expected to land, has improved significantly through successive variants, from the early program's relatively imprecise guidance to the more modern variants that use improved inertial navigation. But the Shahab-3 is not a precision strike weapon in the way that Western cruise missiles or air-launched precision-guided munitions are precision strike weapons. It is a strategic bombardment weapon. It is designed to deliver a large warhead to a general target area rather than to a specific aim point within that area. And that distinction between strategic bombardment and precision strike is crucial for understanding what the damage pattern in Tel Aviv actually looks like and why the most alarming social media claims about total destruction across entire districts do not match what the evidence on the ground shows. A precision strike weapon destroys a specific building. A strategic bombardment weapon causes blast and fragmentation damage across the area surrounding its impact point with an intensity that diminishes as distance from the impact increases. What that produces on the ground is a pattern where the building closest to the impact point sustains severe or total structural damage. The buildings in the immediate surrounding area sustain moderate damage ranging from broken windows to partial structural compromise, and buildings further from the impact point sustain minor damage or none at all. That is the pattern. The ground-level evidence from Tel Aviv shows not citywide destruction, not total structural collapse across entire districts, but a specific pattern of severe damage at impact points, decreasing damage with distance from those points, and large areas of the city that are functionally undamaged. One building may be completely destroyed while the building on the adjacent street is intact. That is not a contradiction. That is what strategic bombardment weapons produce when their warheads detonate in an urban environment. Now let me address Iran's broader strike strategy, because the Shahab-3 is not operating in isolation. Understanding the combination of systems Iran has been deploying explains why the defense picture is more complex than either the Iron Dome mythology or the Iron Dome failure narrative accurately describes. Iran's approach in this conflict has not relied on a single weapon system. It has used a combination of systems deliberately chosen to stress different layers of Israel's defensive architecture simultaneously. Ballistic missiles, including Shahab-3 variants and the Sigil solid-fuel ballistic missile, provide the primary strike capability against fixed infrastructure targets. The Khorramshahr-4, a larger variant with a heavier warhead capacity than the standard Shahab series, has been used against high-value infrastructure aim points where the additional warhead mass produces proportionally greater structural damage. Shorter-range systems, including the Fateh 110 and the Zulfagar missile, have been used in higher volumes against a wider range of target categories. And drones, including loitering munition variants, have been incorporated into strike packages specifically to complicate the radar detection and fire control picture for the defensive systems responding to the primary ballistic threat. The drone component is the element of this strategy that the social media debate about Iron Dome most consistently misses. A drone moving at subsonic speeds is a fundamentally different tracking and engagement problem from a ballistic missile moving at supersonic speeds in its terminal phase. The radar systems that track ballistic missiles and the fire control solutions that engage them are optimized for fast-moving, high-altitude targets. A slow-moving, low-altitude drone saturating the same airspace at the same time forces the defensive system to manage two completely different engagement problems simultaneously. That simultaneous management challenge is not a failure of the defensive system. It is the intended effect of the combined arms strategy. Understanding it is the key to understanding why the defense performance has been uneven in ways that neither the Iron Dome works perfectly narrative, nor the Iron Dome has completely failed narrative accurately captures. Let me explain how Iron Dome and Israel's broader layered defense actually works, because the mythology around this system in both directions is producing more confusion than clarity about what the actual ground situation in Tel Aviv reflects. Iron Dome does not attempt to intercept every incoming projectile. This is not a secret. It is a designed feature of the system. Every projectile detected by the system's radar is assessed by its battle management software for predicted impact point. If the predicted impact point is an unpopulated area, an open field, a body of water, an uninhabited zone, the system does not fire an interceptor. It allows the projectile to land. This is not a failure. It is the efficiency calculation that makes the system economically sustainable as a defensive tool. Interceptors are expensive. Short-range rockets are cheap. A defensive system that fired an interceptor at every incoming rocket, regardless of predicted impact point, would exhaust its interceptor supply against rockets that were going to land harmlessly anyway. The system fires interceptors against projectiles predicted to impact populated areas and withholds them against projectiles predicted to land elsewhere. The result is visible on the ground. Many incoming projectiles are destroyed in the air before reaching populated areas. Some are not intercepted because they are predicted to miss populated areas, and some that are engaged are not successfully intercepted because no defensive system operates at a 100% intercept rate against every threat type it faces. The damage that occurs in Tel Aviv results from projectiles in that third category, the ones that were engaged and not successfully stopped. Understanding that the damage reflects the system's imperfect performance against a portion of the incoming threat, rather than a wholesale failure of the entire defensive architecture, is the key to accurately reading the ground-level damage pattern. The layered nature of Israel's defense extends beyond Iron Dome. David's sling handles medium and long-range ballistic missiles and large rockets in the threat category above Iron Dome's optimized engagement envelope. Arrow handles long-range ballistic missiles at high altitude during the earlier phases of their flight. The combination of these three systems creates overlapping coverage at different altitude bands and range categories. But overlapping coverage is not impenetrable coverage. Overlap means that a projectile that defeats one layer faces another. It does not mean that a projectile that defeats one layer is automatically stopped by the next. And the Shahab-3, with its combination of range, warhead mass, and the improved guidance of its more modern variants, is a weapon that was specifically developed to operate against exactly this kind of layered defensive architecture, which is why it has remained the centerpiece of concern about Iranian missile capability throughout the period in which Israel's layered defense was being constructed. Now let me look at what the ground-level situation in Tel Aviv actually shows, because this is where the viral claims most dramatically diverge from the verifiable evidence. The pattern visible in available ground-level reporting, photographic and video evidence, and accounts from people in the city is consistent with what a strategic bombardment campaign using the weapon mix described above would be expected to produce. Specific buildings at and near impact points have sustained severe damage ranging from partial structural compromise to total collapse. The immediate surrounding areas have sustained moderate damage in the form of blown-out windows, facade damage, and in some cases, partial structural damage to adjacent buildings. The areas beyond the immediate impact zone are largely intact. Main roads remain usable. Public transportation has been disrupted but not eliminated. Emergency services are operating. Hospitals are receiving patients. Electricity is available across most of the city, with localized outages in areas near impact points. The picture is not of a city that is functioning normally. It is not. The disruption to daily life is real and significant. Every time a warning siren activates, which is happening more frequently than at the start of this conflict, residents must stop whatever they are doing and move to the nearest shelter or protected space within the response window the warning provides. That process, repeated multiple times across a day and a night, produces a cumulative disruption to normal activity that the simple count of buildings damaged does not capture. Schools are operating on disrupted schedules. Economic activity is reduced across sectors where normal operations require the kind of stability that sustained bombardment does not provide. Transportation patterns are altered to account for the unpredictability of when the next warning will sound. And there is a psychological burden that accumulates with each warning, each shelter activation, each impact, a burden that does not show up in a damage assessment, but is a real consequence of living under sustained bombardment that compounds over days and weeks in ways that are difficult to quantify but impossible to dismiss. The gap between a city that is not destroyed and a city that is functioning normally is significant. Tel Aviv is in that gap. Not destroyed, not normal, something more complicated and more difficult to communicate than either of those binary descriptions allows. The comparison between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem in terms of impact is instructive because it reflects the targeting priority logic visible throughout this conflict. Tel Aviv, as Israel's primary economic and population center and the location of its most significant commercial, governmental, and military infrastructure concentration, has received the higher volume and higher intensity strikes. Jerusalem, with its unique status as a city whose destruction carries international symbolic and religious consequences that complicate any adversary's targeting calculus, has received a more limited impact. Warning sirens have activated in Jerusalem, impacts have occurred, but the intensity and frequency difference between the two cities is visible in the ground-level evidence and reflects a targeting calculation that treats them differently rather than applying the same strike logic uniformly across both. The information environment surrounding this conflict is as important to understand as the physical situation on the ground, because the information is what most people are using to form their judgments. The pattern of viral misinformation follows a predictable structure. Clips from severe impact points are presented as representative of the entire city. A single destroyed building becomes evidence of citywide destruction. A single area of undamaged street becomes evidence that nothing significant is happening. Neither representation is accurate. The severe damage at impact points is real. The large areas of functional infrastructure beyond those impact points are also real. A video that shows one and not the other is not lying about what it shows. It is lying by omission about what it does not show. Distinguishing between those two things, between what a piece of evidence accurately represents and what it is being used to claim about the broader situation, is the analytical skill that separates an accurate picture of what is actually happening from the picture that the algorithm is optimized to show you. The role of international organizations in this situation has been to attempt to create frameworks for humanitarian protection and conflict de-escalation that the parties to the conflict have engaged with to varying degrees and at varying levels of sincerity. United Nations mechanisms have been activated. Security Council sessions have been convened. Statements have been issued about the protection of civilian infrastructure and the obligations of parties under international humanitarian law. Whether those mechanisms produce outcomes that change the situation on the ground is a separate question from whether the mechanisms are being used. They are being used. Their effectiveness is what remains to be determined by what follows. What the evidence on the ground in Tel Aviv shows is a city that has absorbed a sustained missile campaign, is managing the consequences of that campaign through a combination of defensive systems and civil defense infrastructure that is performing imperfectly but functioning, and is experiencing a level of disruption to normal life that is significant without being the total collapse that the most alarming viral claims describe. Understanding that picture accurately matters, not because accurate understanding changes what is happening on the ground, but because the decisions that governments, international organizations, and ultimately the populations of the countries involved make about how this conflict ends should be based on what is actually happening rather than on the version of events that spreads fastest on a platform optimized for emotional engagement rather than factual accuracy. The information war that runs alongside every physical conflict is not a new phenomenon. What is new is the speed at which competing narratives can reach global audiences before any verification is possible, and the degree to which the platforms through which those narratives travel are structurally incentivized to amplify the most emotionally provocative content regardless of its accuracy. A clip that produces fear or outrage or relief travels further and faster than a careful analysis of what the available evidence actually shows. That structural incentive does not serve the interests of people trying to understand what is happening. It serves the interests of the platforms measuring engagement and the actors on all sides of this conflict who understand that shaping the information environment is as strategically important as shaping the physical one. What I observe in the Tel Aviv situation specifically is that both the most alarming and the most dismissive narratives serve the interests of different parties to this conflict. The narrative of total destruction serves those who want to demonstrate Iranian military effectiveness and Israeli vulnerability. The narrative of successful defense and normal life serves those who want to demonstrate Israeli resilience and the failure of Iranian strategy. Neither narrative is constructed from a disinterested commitment to accuracy, and the people consuming those narratives, ordinary individuals in countries around the world who have no direct experience of what Tel Aviv looks like right now, have very limited tools for distinguishing between the constructed narrative and the verifiable reality. The missiles are real, the damage is real, the disruption is real. The defensive systems that intercepted a significant portion of the incoming strike are real. The imperfections in those systems that allowed some projectiles through are real. And the city that is still there, functioning imperfectly, disrupted significantly, but not destroyed, is also real. Holding all of those things as simultaneously true without collapsing them into the simpler narrative that fits a predetermined conclusion is the analytical discipline that accurate understanding of this conflict requires. It is harder than sharing a clip. It is more demanding than accepting the framing that arrives prepackaged in the most viral content. But it is the only approach that produces a picture of the situation that corresponds to what is actually happening on the ground, rather than to what different parties to the conflict need you to believe is happening.